The way you weave in ends in crochet is going to depend on the fabric you've created and what the final use of the piece will be. Let me show you a few different ways of how I might weave in ends in different situations. Always leave at least a 4-inch yarn tail. This yarn tail is not long enough. I'll show you what happens when we try to weave it in. The problem is my needle is almost as long as the yarn tail, and so when I try to weave it in, there's not a lot to work with here. I'm going to weave under a couple of stitches this way, and all of a sudden I've kind of run out of space to go back and forth. So if my yarn tail is too short, I can weave in as much as I can with the yarn tail and then get a crochet hook that's probably a size smaller than I used and use it to pull the yarn tail through. Back and forth, in and out, or I can actually put the needle through the stitch that I'm going to weave through and then thread the yarn through, but that takes even longer. Here I have a nice long yarn tail. I always want to leave at least a 4-inch or longer yarn tail when working with worsted weight yarn, and maybe even more when I'm working with a thicker yarn. I'm going to decide which is the front and back. This is actually a reversible fabric, so I need to recognize the front and back. Here I've already woven in one tail. I'm going to just work under some stitches on the wrong side in one direction, and then I want to go in a different direction. And so I'm going to scoot up a row here and then maybe weave back in a different direction. So I've gone across and back and maintaining the right tension. I don't want to make it too tight as I weave in. Some people like to work their yarn tail in as they go. So here I have a really long yarn tail that I am catching underneath my stitches as I start my new row. And I might do that for a little bit, but I don't think that's going to be sufficient. No matter how long I do it, I'm still only working my yarn tail underneath in one direction. Instead, what I do is I work it underneath for a while, and then I leave the yarn tail there and finish my row. I finished working my green color. I have a long tail at the end, and I have this other tail where I had caught the yarn tail in as I worked. I want to go back, however, and do some additional weaving in. So this is not sufficient because it can pop out, because if there's any strain put on it in this direction, it's going to come out. I'm going to either turn around and go back in the opposite direction, or I'm going to head up that post stitch right there, that double crochet, and maybe head back in the other direction on another row. That gives me a really secure end, and I know that it won't come out no matter which way the fabric gets pulled. Weaving in ends on a chain is a little bit different because we don't have much fabric to work with. What I'm going to do is weave it in on the back bumps of the chain. So here's the front of my chain that looks like a lot of V's. When I turn it over, I have bumps, and I'm going to work back and forth underneath those bumps. I want to do this for a couple of inches at least, if I have a couple of inches. If I'm working with longer, or if I'm working with thicker yarn, I want to do it for more than a couple of inches because I want to do, I don't know, at least 10 stitches worth if I've got that much chain to work with. Sometimes when you're working with a chain, you can work that far and then you reach a point where there's fabric, and then I would work into the fabric. But here I just have a chain. And once I feel like I've worked it far enough, I can cut the yarn close to the chain. The front of my chain still looks like a chain, and the back is a little more solid than it was before, but it's pretty invisible. When I have a lacy fabric with a lot of open work, it's a little bit harder to figure out where I need to put my stitches when I'm weaving in the ends. I'm just going to stay on the solid portions of the stitches, so stay away from jumping over any chain spaces. And usually I can find the base of some stitches all together. And generally just work in as many directions as I can, not just all in one direction. So here I am going sort of back up a vertical and maybe under some chains. And then maybe back down at the base of these stitches. So making sure that I've woven in several directions and for at least 2 or 3 inches for this particular size yarn. Another thing that we often do is when we're starting a piece in the round, you can see this was a motif that we started in the round. Here's my beginning end, and I have caught that yarn tail underneath those stitches that I worked in the beginning ring, which is fine, but that's again not enough. I need to then take that yarn tail, and I know that it's coming out from this direction, so that I know that I had woven it in or caught it in going in this direction. I need to turn around and go back in the other direction. And I can even do maybe a little back stitch here. This is the thing that really secures that yarn tail and makes sure that it doesn't pop out and create a loose beginning of that motif. If you'd like more crochet instruction like this, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Check out the links in the video notes for other ways you can find me. Thanks for watching.